Welcome, everyone, once again to the Sleeping with Sonja podcast. Thank you all for joining me today with a very, very special guest, somebody who I know will intrigue you all as much as she intrigues me, Dr. Gloria Brame.
Well, hello there, Sonia. I'm very happy to be sleeping with you.
Is there any better way to start this show than acknowledging
I
that?
really, I love the title of this.
Here's what I'm going to tell you.
Am I going to be the
I
first one to sleep with you?
You actually very well might be. If things go well on this episode, Gloria, you are the sleeping with Sonia, the
I'm your,
initiator.
I'm your podcast cherry.
You might be my
I
you
mean,
might be my first. You might be my first.
or
That's
you'll
for
be
sure.
mine. Right,
Yes, I
exactly.
mean either way, already I am so happy to have you here because this conversation is we're like 60 seconds in and it's already exactly where I knew it would be. So before we
Uh-huh.
get into you and what you do, I'm going to tell everyone a little bit about some of your background because I think it really is it's powerful and it's fascinating and I think it really paints a great picture of what you bring to the conversation. Legendary author, award winning sex therapist, and certified sexologist Dr. Gloria G. Brame has been a pioneer of BDSM and fetish study, education, research, and advocacy for over 30 years. She founded the first online peer support forum for kinky people on CompuServe in 1987 and published her first bestseller, Different Loving, in 1993. Since then, Gloria has maintained a passionate commitment to helping sexually non-conventional people overcome obstacles and find their joy. Gloria has authored 10 books in different genres to spread her gospel that sex and gender diversity are the true norm for adults. Now, okay, so as a nurse and now as a nurse anesthetist, I have some pretty interesting days at work. It sounds like you might take the cake here.
I love my work because even when people present with the same problem, let's say I have two patients who are working on vaginismus or they're working on ED, they want to overcome it. Uh, You know, their life story and the arc of their journey to be where they are usually quite different. It's not all the same. It's not like, you hear the same series. I always thought, gee, if I was a psychologist, it would be always talking about people's mothers, right?
Right, that very typical
And
mindset, right.
right, and that would be very typical issues usually. But sex, by its very nature, is such a private thing in a human life. What our fantasies were as kids and what they are today. Very few people actually share their genuine, their authentic sex history.
Mm,
You know,
mm.
I get a
So
lot of,
you're
I've never told anyone this.
sure, you're one of the people who is privy to information that other people may not have ever said out loud and probably ever thought
Correct.
that they would.
Right.
So what would you say among your patients now that you've been doing this for a number of decades? Is there any sort of common theme in terms of why people come to you? What is the most common purpose?
I would say that underlying most of the people who have difficulties are shame and sexual inhibitions.
Mm,
People who love a lot of sex, sometimes they can be ashamed of how much they need it. You
right,
know, People
right,
who love to watch porn feel ashamed that they're watching porn at all, or someone
right.
in their life is making them ashamed of that. People with kinks and fetishes, you know, um, it's a lot easier for young people who are growing up in a world with
Mm,
a large LGBTQ voice,
right,
as opposed to,
right.
let's say, people my age who really
So
only
there's
know, yeah, negative things about being different, right?
so you really see a huge difference in terms of the
I do.
generational gaps and separations.
They have a different issue, which is enormous anxiety issues,
Mm.
you know?
That's today's the younger
Today's
generation that
yeah,
you're seeing,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, the
How
younger
has
generation, and that, or like incredible shyness, you
mm,
know? They've all seen porn and they don't blink at
right,
kink.
right,
That's not like a big thing to them. It's like, "Oh, okay. I wouldn't do it, but, you do you." That kind
right.
of thing,
So it's
right?
it's it's almost that advent of ever since we've introduced social media and the internet into the world, it almost sounds like your younger patients have more difficulty with the in-person connection than they do with the
Correct.
other stuff.
Right. Like, and just relaxing and letting go sometimes of the internet. You
Mm,
know what I mean? Just being able to forget the doom scrolling they did that has, really hurt their performance, or forgetting that, I mean, it's a it's a different kind of hard world for them.
mm,
Life is always hard, but it
yeah,
seems to
right.
be, because they see the influencers, right?
Mm,
And the influencers pretend to have these perfect lives,
you sure
to
do.
be absolutely gorgeous at every minute and every
Mm,
hour of the day.
mhm, mhm.
And, and some of them are authentic, but most of them seem to be using, backgrounds.
Sure.
Fake backgrounds,
Yeah, of
and taking
course.
pictures in their apartment, but so close up that you think, they're, attending a Gucci fashion
They're
show or whatever it
sure,
might
sure.
be,
They're
right?
they're they're on a yacht in Saint Tropez, but they're actually in
Right.
their living room kinda thing, yeah.
Yeah, right. Or their dad's swimming pool because they live in
Right.
the basement. You know what I mean?
Right, exactly, exactly.
So, but what they see, the images that are projected to them is that, you have to look a certain way, you have to be beautiful, you have to be good looking, you have to be slim, even with the size acceptance. There's still
Mm,
this hyper focus on dieting and wearing corsets, and you know what I mean?
right,
Training
of
your
course.
body, and makeup. Boy, people were never as obsessed with makeup as
And
they are
and
today.
filters, literal filters
And
that
filters,
alter your face.
so it makes people feel really unfit to be seen.
Mm,
To go out, they're uncomfortable going out. They're not comfortable sometimes even meeting face to face on Zoom. They're very shy.
yeah, and I would imagine that by proxy would make not just dating and relationships, but especially something as vulnerable as sex
Right,
feel much more challenging.
right. You know, and everybody's very concerned now with issues of consent and being able to be intentional about sex.
Sure.
So I would say those are the kinds of things that crop up with my younger clients, which is just uncertainty on how to navigate this new world they're living in,
Right.
which is
Right.
very new and nobody has experience with it. And they can't, their parents don't understand it and
Yeah.
their
Of course.
grandparents don't understand it, right?
Of course. And I'm sure after, you know, I am quite curious as to how COVID impacted your world and your job because I know the pandemic led to such severe social anxiety among so many adolescents and teens coming
Yes,
up that in this sort of post-COVID universe, it's as though people became more comfortable being on their own than being with
right.
other people.
My clients, if they're going to be young, will be between, let's say, 20 and 28.
Mm,
My young clients, that's the
yeah,
range. So I don't see teens at all. So they were probably most impacted, actually,
right.
by
Sure.
COVID. Well, another common theme among my younger clients is that a lot of them moved in with whoever they were dating at the beginning of COVID,
Mm,
and then the relationship went wrong because they
interesting.
didn't really know the person. They didn't really
Interesting.
have a period of time. It was more like Well, if we don't move in together, we can't sleep together.
Right. Right. That's an interesting caveat, right? And one that's probably only highly specific to a time when the literal world had shut down.
Right. We might live apart and not want to travel, and we don't know, who we've each been exposed to. At least if we live
Sure.
together, we isolate together, and it's not going to be as lonely. So I've seen a lot of those couples who
Yeah.
went through COVID together.
Yeah. And how do couples who are married or are in partnered relationships come to see you together, or is it typically an individual situation where each one comes separately?
I would say couples are only about, at any given time, 30% of my practice.
Yeah,
So
interesting.
mostly it's individuals, who are usually dealing with their own problem, like
Who- In in your experience, who's having the best sex?
I think kinky people.
Interesting.
Well,
Interesting.
and I shouldn't say that. I think a lot of, you know,
But I guess it's fair to ask, what is kinky?
what is kinky? I would
Right, what is
say,
kinky?
well, kinky it's really, you call it alternative sexuality community.
Right.
So, swingers are still swinging, they, you
They're not
know,
going anywhere.
no, that's their sexuality,
Yeah, right,
Poly
right,
people are still poly. The
right.
rules changed under COVID in terms of how you chose to protect yourself.
Mm,
But those relationships didn't end, and neither did the seeking for partners really end, even though, like a lot of dominatrices, closed down,
right,
but that was because they didn't want to risk seeing strangers. But there were
right,
always, sex work kind of really went through a hard time,
right,
you know.
right.
But for kinky people, because it's not usually about being intimate, because a lot of it is
Mm,
play stuff, a lot of them
interesting,
kept playing,
interesting.
you
So
know.
they weren't as impacted by over the years.
They were impacted by the lack of access to community, because
Right,
that's a big thing, but they were not, limited in their daily lives with their existing partners.
right. So what would you say to someone who wants to enjoy a more interesting, I guess, for lack of a better term, sex life, who is interested in alternative sexual modalities, but feels like maybe their partner isn't quite there yet?
You know, all of these alternative sexualities have a basic requirement, and this is whether it's swinging, poly, um, a relationship with an asexual, a relationship with a kinky person, a relationship with a trans person. These things all require long, deep conversations.
Mm,
You know,
and that can be very scary for many, many people.
it is. And sometimes
Yeah.
people come to me so they can have that conversation.
Right.
It
Right.
really depends, but that's going to usually be somebody older, you know,
Right.
because it's not atypical for people to, when they're young and horny, like in their 20s, at peak
Right.
hormonal desire and the
Right.
ability to act on it, not
Right.
just, jerking off because that's
Right.
younger,
Right.
but yeah. Um, usually they can sustain on plain old sex.
Mm,
Just get in
yeah.
bed and do the
Right.
thing and do the other thing and maybe a little butt stuff, but that's good enough,
Right,
right?
right. You
But
know,
usually
special
by the
save it for a special occasion, dangle the carrot for an
right,
anniversary or a
yeah, that
birthday,
kind
and
of thing, right?
then
But then in their 30s, as the hormones start changing, especially in men, more so than women. But in and people are more tired, or maybe they've just been doing the same thing in bed for the last 15 years. That's when it really hits them that, wow, I really always wanted to try blah 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 blah.
Mm,
Or I fell into an internet rabbit hole and now I need to do this thing that I saw in the porn.
right,
Which
right,
seems to be, because that turned me on like, Good. Nothing ever turned me
Right.
on before.
I didn't realize that was a thing, and now that I know it's a thing, I'm curious. Right.
Right.
So
Very curious.
how much of how important are orgasms to sex and the people that you're your clients, people that you're talking to? Is the end goal of an orgasm something that matters to them, or is it the sex as a whole, as an entire entity that makes more sense?
Well, for some people, sex, an orgasm is the definition of whether it was good or not, right?
Interesting. Yeah. Uh-huh.
So if they don't, both didn't come, it was an incomplete experience. As a sex scientist, a sexologist, I say, and have said 1,000 times, orgasm is as important as brushing your teeth.
Mm,
Orgasm is really good for your brain and your body. There is a reason why we're all driven to get
right.
horny and
Right.
have orgasms. And there's a reason why all of us, certainly before we're adult age, but then also afterwards, generally will reach for ourselves when we're really
Mm,
horny too
mm,
and fulfill that need. And
right.
there's a reason for that. And the reason is when you have an orgasm, all these happy chemicals start flowing through your body, all these natural drugs, right?
Right.
And it's been tied to lowering the risk of heart attacks, lowering the risk of strokes,
Right. Right.
lowering the rate of depression, possibly linked to longevity. That, the longer you're having orgasms, more,
The longer you
the
the
more,
longer you're gonna be around,
yeah, the
the
more
more you
life you
have, the more
have in you, the more life you have in you. So, and also maintaining that even into old age, the more you do it, the better it works. And if
if
you stop
don't
doing it like when you're 50, don't
yep.
expect to be horny at 70,
You
really.
don't
You
you
have,
if you don't use it, you lose it kind of thing?
yes, orgasm is
Mhm.
very much like that, you know.
So then, there's a lot of literature that has indicated that heterosexual women are the least likely to have an orgasm when partnered with a male partner.
Well, that's also why a lot of women will come to me. Usually, really, the reason is either they have an underlying anxiety or an underlying trauma that
Mm,
actually blocks them and they've
yeah,
never masturbated
yeah,
either. They really have issues around their genitalia
right,
or think their genitalia smell funny or aren't attractive or, you know what I
right.
mean?
It could
Women,
be traumatic or religious or physiologic or something that's going on that's
right.
putting
And
up a
the other
wall.
option is they're not getting the kind of sex that makes them come.
Mm.
In other
And what
words, the gu-
what kind of sex makes a woman come most frequently? I guess is the next
would
natural,
be adequate foreplay
Mm,
and a kind of foreplay that really she likes. Not everyone wants to have somebody with a finger in their pussy, but I would say most
right,
women do.
right.
You know,
Right. Based on
I
and you
mean,
know what? You're the expert, Dr. Brame.
a
we will
finger, a
defer to
tongue, a tease, or if you're kinky, a clip or a
so
clamp or a flick.
and
I mean,
and
it
you know,
depends on what you're into, right? But
and there's people out there who are saying, "Who's got time for all of that?"
the
Who's
person
got
who wants to have an orgasm
uh-huh.
has to
They'll make
make
the
the
time.
time.
Make the
Right.
time.
And, so there are a million different ways for people to, the path to orgasm doesn't have to be um, digital manipulation,
Mm,
actually. It can be a million different things. It can be pressure on the area. It could be, like reading a story,
right.
that's really
Right.
erotic. The idea
Right.
is if the woman is pre lubricated, the experience will be pleasant. She'll feel better.
Mm,
And so,
mm.
sometimes it's lack of lube.
Just
That
just at the very simple solution, right? Something
yeah,
that
that would
can
be the simplest solution. So I
right.
usually will ask, I'll go through all of that with clients. to figure out, what is impacting their performance. So maybe one of the most devastating cases I worked on was a woman who, after working with me for a couple of years, realized that what was really happening was that her husband was essentially raping her every time
Oh, yeah,
because
that's
he gave
horrific.
her zero pre-stimulation, no
Mm,
foreplay. He didn't even say romantic things to her, nothing. When he
mm,
wanted her, he, you know, ordered her to lie down and he got on
yeah,
top of her.
yeah.
And she never had an orgasm with him. And
Mm,
so he put the blame on her that she was non-orgasmic. And she came to me for
mm,
anorgasmia,
mm,
in the belief that she could not come.
right,
And of course, she had never masturbated
right.
in her life. She was young when she married. She expected him to know what to do. She thought he
Mm,
did know what to do, and she was a failure
yeah.
too
So
because she never
her
came.
so her version of sex was not just transactional, but even traumatic
Yeah,
instead of being something.
right. And once you have trauma in sex, whether it's
Yeah,
a guy getting traumatized because a woman says, "You can't satisfy me with that penis,"
yeah,
that's like the worst thing a woman could say to a man, you
yeah.
know? And it's like this guy or men who think that a woman should automatically be ready for him and
Mm,
prepared without
mm.
actually doing any work to help her get prepared. And
Putting
that's
in any
really a
effort.
biological issue. I mean, women can't help it. You know, the penis brain connection and the vagina brain connection are different.
As I read your book, Sex for Grown-ups,
Hmm.
which I found so fascinating, and I had so many terms that I highlighted just from a purely educational
Right,
perspective, and as such a science nerd, not only as somebody who's really fascinated by, the biology and evolutionary basis of sex,
right.
just to know that there are so many terms and things that exist out there. One of the
Hmm.
most fascinating things to learn was the fact that the 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 female sex organ and the pleasure center, I suppose, the clitoris, is actually huge.
That is exactly why it takes so long to warm up. It
Interesting.
is. Yeah. I mean, they
Interesting.
only really discovered it a few years ago. Well, at this point,
Mm.
maybe 10 or 12. Sorry, I compress time now that I'm old, but you know, a
Experience,
few
your
years
experience.
it could be 12 years, a long time is, I don't even want to tell you what a long time is anymore. Anyway, but that's when they really discovered, and it's like the penis, whatever you see on the out, whoops, I'm demonstrating here, but whatever you see on the outside
they can
is
they
about
can see on
this.
YouTube. They'll be able to watch you on YouTube with your visual demonstrations
Oh,
if they're
okay,
not
fine.
listening. So
Well, whatever you see on the outside, pretty much the same size is inside too,
I mean, if you
right?
stop and
It's
think
really
about
like a
that,
banana or a boomerang, you know?
it literally, so when I was
And
looking
this,
at
yeah,
photos, I said it looks like it's got literally like two legs. It has like a pair of legs that are kind of wrapped around. It's big.
it,
It's
and
impressive.
right, and the clit is the same way. It's like what you see on the outside is nothing like what's on the inside. It's a
Mm,
pretty good sized machine that
right,
powers your reproductive system,
right.
you know? Yeah.
So then I guess one of the biggest struggles becomes there's a different thermostat setting in if you're having heterosexual sex. Men are sort of fired up and ready to go very quickly, and women require a lot more time. And then there's a recovery period at the end for men where they just want to, roll over and take a nap. And women are like, hey, can we talk? Can we cuddle? Can we have a snack? Whatever. So,
There are women who proudly should proudly call themselves happy sluts because there are women who,
love that. Oh, I love
you
that.
know, but because there are women who are easily receptive. The
Mm,
problem is that people don't always marry people who are sexually compatible. And I
Interesting.
often see that. That's a big thing. The one person wants it once a month and the other person would like it every 2 nights, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's a big difference. That's
Huge.
it's
And
a
it's
big difference
actually
to
a big
negotiate.
problem in marriages because, you know, usually the one who doesn't want it that much also resents the fact that the other one is either always asking for it or that the other one jerks off, which they
Interesting.
consider disloyal.
It
Like, you
cheat
should
some form of
save it for
cheating or
me.
just
Right.
interesting.
You know.
So when you have these clients who come in
Mhm.
and tell you their whatever their in a long-term relationship or they're in a marriage,
Mhm.
however their partner to be, do
Mhm.
you find that the majority of times that they either don't want sex or can't orgasm is actually physiological, or is it some sort of, well, he's fighting with me over, the milk in the refrigerator, so I just am not interested?
Good question, because all of the above.
Oh, okay. So there's no one, it's all of it.
It's
Yeah.
any and all. I've had clients who couldn't perform with their husbands because their husbands were such Debbie Downers.
Mm,
I'm not even going to say, necessarily abusive,
yeah.
but they were just never able to be romantic or passionate.
Yeah. Never complimentary, never able to give them that. Interesting.
Or if
Yeah.
they weren't complimentary, it was like the one part of the body that they found
Mm,
sexy, but it was not like an enfolding love,
interesting.
with that feeling of
Hmm.
safety and security that builds trust, that makes a person
Mm,
even sexier, right?
uh-huh.
Um, to some of us, I always have to make exceptions because
Of course.
first rule of sex, there are always exceptions. Always, always.
Never
But
never
that's
say
typical.
never, and there's so much more to discover. I'm sure, you
Yeah.
know, as
Well, we're
as we
we're
evolve as humans and society changes.
we are naturally little bundles of diversity,
Yeah,
with
right.
untapped potentials.
Or I love that. Bundles of diversity with untapped potentials. I love that.
But and you see that most in sex, actually,
Mm,
because
mm,
sex is not where everybody got like a template on how to live. Like most people, it's like you go to school, you get an education, you get a job, you get married, you have 2 to 4 children, and you retire. And that's
right,
the template for your life,
right,
you know?
right.
And
And
right.
I will tell you right now, we would not even be having this conversation had I continued down. I am divorced, and my mom died 2.5 years ago. The only reason I'm having these conversations, Gloria, with you right now is because I feel more comfortable opening up to other ideas openly and
Mhm.
sharing my thoughts and curiosities and interests with other
I love
people.
that. Yeah.
Because listen, you and I both know so many of us are curious about so many things, but feel hesitant to tell the people around us.
Or to upset the apple cart. It's
That
like
that too.
life is going well enough, and we look at our blessings, and why
Mm,
mess with it, you know?
mm,
I say this now as a widow,
right,
like
right,
I'm pretty happy, do I
right.
miss, would I like to have another husband? I don't know about a husband. I would certainly love to have somebody that I loved and could have intimacy with. But
Sure,
then I
sure.
think about what it really involves.
Right, right. And I would imagine, I would venture to guess there are many women like myself who, whether or not I decide to marry again is irrelevant. Maybe I will, maybe I won't. I would never say
Mhm,
never, but at this point for me it's not a priority. And I
mhm,
don't want children. And one of the interesting things about when you know that you don't want children, is that sex is for sport. Sex is for the act of pleasure and not for procreation. And that's
right.
a very jarring thing for people to sort of conceptualize.
Well, that's a thing that'll, a lot of kinky people have. I'm not that they don't have, many of them have kids, but I will
Mhm.
note that most of them seem to have their kids before they go exploring. Or
Interesting.
at least in the old generation, they did.
Mhm,
I do know
mhm.
some people who have, been in what we call the lifestyle for years and do opt to have children. But I would say most of the people, like, who get active in a lot of these worlds, they're already older and they had their kids and they feel freer. You know,
Mm,
the kids are not living at home, so
right, right.
yeah,
They feel that sort of liberation and being able to
right,
explore more openly.
right. Just like you felt, I guess, free
Sure, I mean,
to
it's
really
a
be
very
yourself. Yeah.
yeah, it's after I think we are such a and perhaps as women especially, we tend to be people pleasers, and we tend to especially coming from the background of the child of immigrants, growing up a good girl, never wanting to disrupt problems, knowing that, it would be go to college, get a job, get married, start a family as the preconceived view of how life should go. And I know there's so many of us out there who
Oh yeah.
either who either do it and say, this wasn't what I was supposed to be doing, or do it and say, now I'm resentful and miserable, or do it and say, I love my life, but I'm looking for more.
Well,
And that's
I
where
love
you
my
come in.
life and I'm looking for more is a very strong place to be.
Mm, yeah,
That's
I
a
think so.
strong space to come from,
I
you
think so.
know, which is everything's great, but I want to evolve
Mm,
and add, you know.
mm. So what are your thoughts? And this is something that I often think about, especially in this modern age of modern day dating and relationships. Do you think that humans were intended to be monogamous?
My theory is some people were. In other words,
Mm,
there are probably hundreds of gene markers
mm,
controlling what we like and we don't like because
right.
we know there are hundreds of gene markers, controlling what we like to taste, right?
Mm,
Or what kind of clothes we like to wear. I mean, these things are not just random accident. It's a
right.
combination of our genetic inclination and then what we view as socially normal. And
Mm,
many of us adapt to what is socially normal, even if our genes don't point us that way. And that
mm,
can be, I think, certainly when it comes to sex and gender, that's the really hard part, is
yeah.
that there have always been outliers, and outliers might actually be 50% of humanity, why not?
Right, right. It could be a substantial subset of people. And,
So I
there's
think, right, I think there have always been people who have felt, I just want that one person.
right.
And then I think there are a lot of people who say, I'm young, I'm free, I want everybody.
Mm,
And then there are older people who say, well, at this place in my life, I've known enough people.
mm.
I
Yeah,
see what
right. Been
humanity
been there,
is
done that.
like.
Been there, done that.
I'm
Right,
right. So now I'm going to sort of
right.
create a smaller bubble for
Keep my keep
myself.
my keep my I'm keeping my circle small. I've had enough.
Yeah.
I've
And
seen
it's
enough.
not right. And it's not like, you'll still welcome new people in if they seem to uh, meet your needs at the time
Sure.
or they feel like the right person. But, it's just a process of how people evolve. But, you have to stay in life.
Mm.
I'm technically a boomer.
I don't know about that. I don't buy Gloria,
Te-
I don't know about
te-
that.
I was never of that generation, even when I was of that generation. But,
Right,
um, right. I mean, I'm not in what its meaning is.
right,
Although
right.
somebody had to, correct me on my understanding recently of a meme, and I was devastated.
I mean, listen, to
I'm
be
like,
fair,
oh no, I'm a grandma.
that's that's an evolving space that even I
I
can't keep
know.
up with half the
I
time.
know.
So
Anyway,
you're only a boomer by birth date and
yes.
nothing else. I'll tell you that right now.
But
It's a different. I think that the way you view your generation is probably different because you were always different in a good way
I
from
always
those
thought of
around
them
you.
as boomers. I
Even when
mean,
you're like, you're all a
yeah,
bunch of
before
boomers.
I had the
Love it.
word for it, but as soon as I heard, the internet calling them that, I was like, that was the problem with, there was like a
That is
slim
hysterical.
portion of people who saw beyond the kind of propaganda they bought into. And they
Mm,
were really the ones with you come home from war, you buy a nice house in the suburbs, you live in this little, usually, since I'm white, a white bubble,
mm,
you know.
mhm, mhm.
You try to get ahead, you make sure the kids, are trying to improve themselves and, the whole, and a lot of people just bought into that of my
Yeah,
generation.
a very, very, sort of cookie cutter narrative,
Yeah,
which
that's
which is
normal life.
not necessarily a bad thing. I hope people realize that you can have
No, but it
a
wasn't
very
even.
traditional life, but it's not necessarily an honest life if
Well,
you
if you're happy with it,
sure,
it's great.
sure.
That's really a lot of people don't really subscribe to the philosophy that you have to be happy inside
Mm,
for life to be good.
mm,
They're like, what's happiness? That's bullshit. You think my
mm.
father was happy when he was working in the coal mine? You know what I mean?
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
like
yeah,
that kind of
yeah,
thing. Life
yeah.
is
They
hard. You got to do the
they
hard things. And
it's a more pragmatic approach
right.
to
Rather
this is
than
how life is.
right. Whereas I think um, many other people actually do think about the quality of their lives
Sure,
and they want to improve the quality of their lives and
sure,
they want to feel, they believe and they hope for more fulfillment in life.
right.
And there was a recent study that, older women are a lot happier than older men
Interesting.
because older women tend to want to keep getting educated and keep opening up and meeting new people
Mm,
and basically living life, doing a lot of volunteering or
yeah,
charity work, either being helpful to society or picking up a second job, a little job,
yeah,
or,
yeah, yeah.
you know, it could be as simple as devoting yourself to your grandchildren, but it's something that
Right.
you love that keeps you young because you're either surrounded by young people or you're really doing a lot of self improvement, watching your health, going to the gym, making new girlfriends.
It sounds like self-growth and having
Yes,
sort of that growth mindset and even a sense of curiosity and
correct.
dabbling in things adds to such joy. And even a large part of the reason why I even started this show was because over the last few years I had this major shift where I said, if you're not happy, what's the point? There is no purpose. I cannot be one of those people who exists in a purely pragmatic state and
Hmm.
simply says, life is hard, get over it. There are really great and really beautiful things, even in dark and difficult times.
There
And
are.
having people like you on the show to discuss things that are not necessarily the most conventional topics, but are still there at the end of the day, it is the basis of humanity. Sex is very, very powerful.
It is very powerful. It has the power to make us feel truly fulfilled and truly happy. You
Mm,
know, so you asked me, you know, about, is how important is an orgasm?
yeah,
And I
yeah,
would say it's actually very important to human happiness
mm,
because I can tell you that people who are in relationships and yet never had an orgasm with their partner suffer.
yeah,
Either they suffer because the partner is mean about it or
yeah,
they feel inadequate.
right. So there's some sort of a sense of
And
failure.
that's not because of people telling them that. so
Mm,
much. It's not even because of culture. I think it's hardwired in.
yeah. What would you say is the first step somebody should take if they're struggling with their sex life or their sexual identity? Who should they turn to? How can they find their own Gloria Brame out there to help with their problems?
I'm here. I
Yeah.
still work.
Okay, amazing. So, I mean,
But
I
there
mean,
are,
that
these
truly.
days, there are
Yeah.
plenty of people like me. And there are
Yeah.
people, who are certified sex coaches.
Yeah.
And as I said, there are many different paths.
Yeah.
There are many great books out there. You can try
Mm.
that. There are even gynecologists who offer injections.
Oh, yeah. And that's it's great to hear that
Hmm.
because we know that in women's health we are so far behind in terms of
Extremely far
progress.
behind. Right. So, does everybody need to see a sex therapist? Personally, I think so, yes. At least once.
Right. Right.
If only to
Does it
get the all clear. No, you sound
does
fine. Just keep going on, You're
Gloria,
doing it right.
does this qualify as my free trial?
This
Is this does this
only
count as
if
my
only if I help you with an issue.
we'll have to we'll have to take that offline, or perhaps we'll do
Yeah, that's too vulnerable. Yeah.
some extra bonus footage for the listeners.
Yeah.
So,
But no, I think everybody needs to tell their story, their personal
yes.
history, and almost everybody has some weird experience that
Mm,
they'd like to discuss, like the time it went really haywire,
yeah,
or why did I jerk off to this thing I would never do in real life, or
right,
is something wrong with me? Where do you get those answers? You don't get them from MDs.
right. And
MDs are not comfortable talking to you about sex on
well,
the
and I
whole.
think one of the parts that's so refreshing about you, it's not just in reading your books, but also speaking to you. You have such a sense of openness and candor that it's very easy to speak to you about
Hmm.
topics that you wouldn't necessarily be able to talk to with, your primary physician or your gynecologist. And I think it's so powerful to have that sense of connection with who you're speaking to.
Well, yeah, because through research and work, it's just become completely normalized for me
Mm,
to talk
right,
about subjects that other people are like, what?
right,
But,
right.
I see a lot of fetishists, for
Mm,
example,
hmm.
and I don't write about all of them. I mean, people have said, who's your weirdest fetishist? And I can't say that any of them are weird.
Yeah.
But some of them have unpleasant fetishes to most
Mm,
people, or what
mm,
most people would say, "Ew, ick, ah." But I'm
right.
listening to them and they're just another human being. They didn't choose their fetish. They need help. I'm not offended.
It's like how when I'm at the hospital and I could see like the most horrific thing in the world, but then I'll go in the break room and just enjoy my little snack and have my coffee and not think twice about it.
Right,
When you do something enough and when you're exposed to it enough and you become an
right.
expert in your craft, it's second nature.
It
It's second
is.
nature. And I think that's so valuable. So,
Right. The only thing I don't work on is criminal sex. I want to
okay.
be clear about that.
Okay.
I
That's good to
don't
know too.
help people who are interested in children. They need different help.
Okay.
I don't help
Yeah, of
people
course.
who are, yeah, hurting
Of course.
animals. You know,
Of course.
as long as it's adult and consensual.
So, what we
Yep.
will do at the end of the show, we will make sure that we have your contact information in the
Thank
show
you.
notes. And I think this is probably a great episode for me to gather some questions from any of our listeners or viewers. And if they
Okay.
have questions for Dr. Brame, be sure to send them, shoot them my way, either drop them in the comments in my social media, or we'll figure out a method because I would love to have you back on the show. I think people are really going to get a kick out of having these open conversations with somebody who not only knows, but is a literal expert.
Well, thank you.
Of course. Thank you, Dr. Brame, for your time
You're
and for
very
being here.
welcome. It was a joy.
And
I knew we'd have a
and
blast together.
absolutely. Thank you for, I think, popping my podcast cherry. If we do end up airing this
A
episode
badge of
first,
honor I shall wear for many years.
That's it. That's it.
Okay.
Of course, anyone who's out there listening, this is probably a great time for you to go and masturbate. You know, I think that's
Every day
so
is a
there
good
are
opportunity.
every day. That's going to be our new mantra. Every day is a new day to wake up and masturbate. And on that note, thank you all so much for sleeping with Sonia, for being here with me today, and for listening in. Until next time.